Hello and welcome to our US inflation season updates. As you know, today, Tuesday, January 13, the most important economic data that we have been waiting for, it was the US inflation numbers, while the geopolitical tensions continues, especially in the Middle East, and the financial markets, and especially the energy market, focusing on what's going on inside the Iran and what's happening there, and will the U.S. Uh, will take military action or not? That talks about that so much, and that can increase the market reaction, especially for the energy market. On the other hand, on the economic calendar, U.S. inflation numbers, they were at the center of the stages. Inflation and core inflation both measures the core and headline inflation. They repeated the same numbers as they had in November. December inflation increased by 0.2% for core inflation and 0.3% for headline inflation. That's the same numbers that we had in December as well. While just a little bit different is that for core inflation, market was expecting to see a little bit higher monthly numbers, just like for the monthly inflation, core inflation, the market was expecting 0.3% growth, but we saw the 0.2% growth. The same trend happened for annual data. On the annual scale, the core inflation increased by 2.6%, the same speed that we had, the same piece that we had in November, and the headline inflation also repeated the same number of November by increasing by 2.7%. On there is also the only difference is that on the annual scale, the core inflation was expecting slightly increase to 2.7%, but it increased to 2.6%. The core CPI index and the CPI index, both of them also, they repeated almost the same number as the previous month, slightly different on we saw especially in the core CPI index, which increased slightly from 331.07 to 331.86. That's the only thing, 0.8%, 0.8 unit, actually, we can say it increased. But generally, what we can see in the market, what we can see in the numbers, that the inflation is stable. These numbers, more than anything that can tell us, is that inflation is stable. It doesn't, even if you see the numbers somehow just like red in the calendar, and maybe at the first reaction says, no, inflation is slowed down. No, inflation didn't slow down. Inflation just didn't increase further. As we can see here, the inflation is sticky. That's what we can understand from the data. Yeah, at the first reaction, we can be a little slightly just like somehow the positive, can have some positive reaction and say that, okay, it didn't increase as much as it's supposed to be, but we cannot say that it's a slowed down because this is sticky. However, on the earning calendar, the earnings reports also started today. And as we saw here, the JP Morgan and Bank of New York Mellon, both of them, they could beat the expectations for both revenue and earnings per share or EPS. That's what we can see here in the chart, and that in the table in the numbers, and that can tell us that especially for the financial sector that today we're gonna have the tomorrow and the begin at the first days of the next week. Generally, the financial institute, we are expecting to see some positive numbers and data report from them, which can be mostly positive for the stock market and mostly for Dow Jones. Let's check the charts. And however, before going to check the chart, I have to say that considering these numbers and what we had in the previous days as well, the market expecting more than 95%, giving a chance for holding the current rates, for not changing the current rates, and that's what we should be care about. That's what we should be care about. And the market still counting on holding the current rates and not changing the policies, which means initial reactions that we had. Let me open the charts. Which means that the initial reactions that we had in the chart shouldn't be based on as our expectations. At the very beginning, the dollar index had a negative reaction and slowed down, but generally, these numbers, as mentioned, cannot be negative for the dollar, while it cannot be positive as well. I mean, it will limit the US dollar uptrend, but it cannot change it to the downtrend because it says that inflation is still sticky. That's why we expect to see the US dollar index again still above 98. Whatever above 98 is a positive for the dollar index. Don't forget about that. But most probably we will see the dollar index above 98.5, while same, I mean, the negative, I mean, the same opposite reaction in the stock market. At the initial reaction, we saw this US dollar, sorry, the NASDAQ and S&P 500, doesn't matter, all the Spain indices, they had a very positive reactions. But now we can see this positive reaction is slowing down slightly, but it doesn't mean that the trend is going to be a negative for the markets, because market already was counting on it, not cutting the rates. I mean, all count is markets already pricing and holding the current rates in January Fed meeting. However, what supported the market more than inflation numbers that today we had, it was the earnings reports, especially for the Dow Jones. That's going to be positive numbers, and that can support the Dow Jones prices to even to gain further. Anyhow, these numbers were not such a brilliant numbers. Also, we can say that okay, the inflation is still already under control, and we can count on a lower inflation. That's why what we can see in the market, that inflation is still sticky, but we have some some signs that it can be under control. That's what we can understand from the markets. That's why we can say these numbers can be natural with the slight positive reactions for the stock markets, and negatively natural and slightly negative reaction for the dollar index. Same reaction that we expect from the stock market, we can expect for the Bitcoin as well. The Bitcoin also can be the natural, I mean, can have the natural reaction to these numbers. I mean, the numbers, they were not inflation numbers, especially were not such a brilliant number to say that, okay, that can support the Bitcoin price. However, when we see the better earnings in the stock market, and we see that okay, the stock market prices are growing up, that can slow down the interest of the investors for the cryptocurrencies as well. Don't worry, don't forget about that. As long as the stock market is fine, it's not such a good news for the cryptocurrency as well, because the people, they trust on what they already get the answer from that. I mean, it's lower number of the investors, they were ready to risk further and invest in the stock market, invest in the cryptocurrency market while they see the stock market is fine and giving them the benefits. Yeah, okay, that's what happened, and what's our expectation for the inflation numbers and the charts as their reaction. Hope it was useful for you. Take this. Bye bye.